You have $287 million, and nobody knows it. Not your neighbor, who waves every morning on his way to a job he complains about. Not your dentist, who still asks if you're doing okay on payments. Not the guy at the car wash, who's been running your name through the loyalty scanner for 6 years and thinks you drive for a living because you're there so often. Not your own mother, who still asks if you need help with rent whenever you mention you're doing okay. You're not hiding, you're just ordinary, on purpose. The number arrived the way it always does, quietly. An email from your accountant on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line, Q2 reconciliation, final. While you were standing in a self-storage unit in Reno, sweeping out a corner some tenant left full of broken drywall and a mattress they didn't want to pay to haul away. This is what $287 million actually looks like. Not a stage, not a headline. A broom, a dustpan, and a phone buzzing in your back pocket. It started with a vending machine that wasn't even yours. You were 26, working the front desk at a regional gym chain for $14 an hour. The kind of job where you memorize everyone's name because they walk past you twice a day and never really see you. There was a protein bar machine by the water fountain that jammed constantly. Members complained. You'd bang on the glass, apologize, write a note to management that never got read. One day, the vending guy came to restock it. You'd seen him maybe 4 times in 2 years. He was in and out in 9 minutes. Unlocked it, refilled it, counted the cash into a bank bag, locked it again. You asked him, half joking, if it was worth his time for one gym. He said he had 40 machines across the metro. Said most people never ask him anything because vending machines aren't interesting to look at. Said something that stuck with you for years afterward. Boring pays the same as exciting. It just doesn't ask you to show up for it. You went home that night and didn't sleep much. Not because of the money, he never told you a real number, but because of the shape of it. A machine that ran without him. A route that paid whether he felt like driving it or not. You had $2,300 saved. You found a used machine listing for $650 in a break room at a tire shop willing to let you place it with a cut of revenue. First month, after restocking costs, it cleared $61. $61. Your coworker made more than that in a single Saturday shift covering for someone. You didn't quit. You bought a second machine. Then a third, placed in a laundromat that lets you in for free because the owner, an older man named Walter, liked that you asked good questions and didn't waste his time. Walter mentioned, almost as an aside, that he was tired of running the laundromat himself and had been thinking about selling for 2 years but didn't know who'd want it. You didn't have laundromat money. You had vending machine money, and not much of it. You started showing up on your day off, not to buy anything, just to watch how the place actually ran, which machines people avoided, which ones Walter babied because they broke often. You noticed his lease had 4 years left at a rate that hadn't moved since he signed it, and that half his utility bill came from 2 industrial dryers nobody used more than twice a week. You asked if he'd consider financing the sale himself instead of waiting for a buyer with cash. He said nobody had asked him that either. 3 weeks later, you put down $4,000, everything the vending machines had made, plus what you'd saved from the front desk job. You were 27 years old, and you owned a laundromat you couldn't have afforded to buy outright in a decade of front desk paychecks.
The first rule you learned, the one nobody says out loud, the money isn't the thing you're looking for. The gap is. The space between what an asset is worth and what its tired owner is willing to let it go for, because they've stopped seeing what's actually in front of them. Nobody at the gym knew. Your coworkers thought you picked up a second job doing laundry, and you let them think it because correcting people costs you something, and you already learned that. Year 1, after renegotiating the maintenance contract Walter had been overpaying for a decade. The laundromat netted $28,000. You didn't buy anything with it, you saved it, and you kept working the front desk because quitting felt like tempting something you didn't fully understand yet. By 29, you owned 3 laundromats and a 4th vending route. You quietly gave notice at the gym. 3 weeks, no announcement, a manager who barely looked up from the schedule when you told her. Nobody there ever learned what you'd actually built while restocking a protein bar machine on your lunch break. This is also the year you started noticing self-storage the way you'd once noticed vending machines. A half-full facility off a state highway run by a company that hadn't raised rates in 6 years because nobody had bothered to check the market. You bought your first unit block for $310,000, most of it financed, a small piece of it your own. It clung to break even for 8 months. Then you brought rents in line with the market, fixed a gate that had been broken so long tenants had started propping it with a cinder block, and it started clearing $6,200 a month. You still drove the same car, a 2016 Corolla with 140,000 miles and a check engine light you'd stopped mentioning to mechanics because you already knew what it was and it wasn't worth fixing yet. At a friend's birthday dinner, someone asked what you did for work. Storage units mostly, some vending machines. The guy across the table, wearing a watch that cost more than your car, nodded politely and turned back to whoever he'd been talking to before. You felt the exact opposite of insulted. The moment someone decides you're not interesting is the moment they stop watching, and the moment they stop watching, you can do whatever you want with the next 10 years. By 35, the portfolio had a shape you could describe in a single breath if you ever needed to, which you never did. 11 laundromats, 6 self-storage facilities across 2 states, the billboard leases, a logistics warehouse you picked up from an owner retiring without a succession plan, the kind of deal that closes because you're the only person who returns the broker's 3rd phone call. None of it made headlines. None of it needed to. You bought a modest 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood full of contractors, teachers, and small business owners, the kind of place where nobody's driveway makes anyone else feel small. Your neighbors think you work in property management. Technically, that's not even wrong.
The loneliness came in slowly, the way most true things do. Your closest friend, Miguel, ran a small electrical contracting business. Good at his job, underpaid for it, stuck at a ceiling that had nothing to do with his skill and everything to do with the fact that nobody had ever shown him how capital actually moved. 2 years ago, he called you about a real opportunity, a small commercial unit near a growing part of town, the kind of property that doesn't come up twice. He needed $60,000. He had $15,000. You could have sent it before the call ended. It would not have registered against anything you owned. It also would not have taught him a single thing, and you'd learned that lesson already, years earlier, with someone else. Money handed too early, gone within 18 months, a friendship that came back quieter than it left. So instead, you asked to come by on Saturday. You sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and went through the deal line by line. The lease terms, the escalation clauses. What happens if his biggest tenant leaves in year 3? He didn't know the answers to half of it, not because he wasn't sharp, but because nobody had ever sat with him long enough to ask. 4 Saturdays later, he'd found a community lender who'd financed the deal against his contracting revenue, restructured his own pricing to improve his margins enough to qualify, and closed without a dollar from you. He called the night he got the keys, said he couldn't have done it without you. You never told him what you could have written the check for instead. That wasn't modesty. It was understanding that the story needed to be his, built by decisions he made, not a wire transfer he'd have to explain to himself for the rest of his life. There are rooms in your life nobody gets invited into. That part never gets easier. Not the secrecy. You made peace with that a long time ago. It's the specific weight of sitting across from someone you love, knowing you could remove their entire problem in 60 seconds, and knowing doing so would be the wrong thing to do. Your mother still calls to ask if you're managing okay. You tell her you are. It isn't a lie, but it isn't the whole truth either. And the gap between those two things is a place you've learned to live comfortably, even when it costs you something you can't quite name. There was a wedding 2 summers ago, a cousin on your father's side, the kind of event where everyone compares notes on jobs and mortgages over rented folding chairs. Someone asked what you drove. You said a Corolla. They laughed, not unkindly, and moved on to someone with a more interesting answer. You ate the chicken,
danced twice, and drove home in the dark past 3 properties you owned without mentioning a single one of them. By 38, you owned 9 laundromats, 4 self-storage facilities, the billboard leases, 2 small apartment buildings bought from owners who'd let their rents fall years behind the market because raising them felt unkind, and a vending and route service business that ran almost entirely without you. Combined revenue crossed 11 figures a year without a single headline, a single pitch deck, a single moment anyone outside a handful of accountants and lenders ever noticed. You started keeping a small notebook, the kind that fits in a jacket pocket, where you wrote down names, owners who mentioned, almost in passing, that they were tired, a man who ran a car wash and joked about retiring one of these days, a woman who managed a small fleet of delivery vans and sighed when she talked about her back. You never approached any of them right away. You let the sentence sit for months, sometimes years, before you ever picked up the phone. Patience, you'd learned, was the only asset that never showed up on a balance sheet and mattered more than all the others combined. The email came on a Tuesday. You were standing in the Reno storage unit, sweeping out a corner some tenant had abandoned along with a broken mattress, when your phone buzzed against your leg. Subject line, Q2 reconciliation, final. Sandra's summaries never had an exclamation point. Neither did you. That's probably why this worked. You leaned the broom against the wall and read the number twice, the way you read something when you're not sure you're reading it correctly. $287 million. You stood there under a bare bulb, the smell of dust and old cardboard in the air, a forklift beeping somewhere outside as it backed towards the loading dock. Nobody around you knew. The forklift didn't know. The mattress in the corner definitely didn't know. You thought for a moment about a 26-year-old at a gym front desk, banging on a jammed vending machine glass, wondering why a stranger with 40 routes seemed so unbothered by his own life. You felt something now that wasn't pride and wasn't relief. It was recognition, the exact same feeling you'd had the first month machine cleared $61 profit, except it now had more zeros behind it, which meant it was never about the number. It was about the architecture. The proof that something built slowly, quietly, out of the parts nobody else was looking at could keep compounding long after you stopped needing it to prove anything. You picked the broom back up, finished the corner, locked the unit, texted Sandra back 3 words, "Thanks, looks right." You drove home in the Corolla, the check engine light still on, past a car wash you don't own yet but have been quietly watching for the past 6 weeks, a location with a broken vacuum station, and an owner who mentioned, almost in passing, that he was tired of running it himself. You didn't stop tonight. You never do the first time. You let the sentence sit a little longer. Tomorrow there's a dryer that needs a belt replaced at the laundromat on 5th. Miguel's building has a tenant renewal to finalize. Sandra will send a note about Q3 projections sometime next month. Unremarkable as always. Your mother will call on Sunday, and you'll tell her you're doing okay, and it still won't be the whole truth. Nothing about your week looks any different than it did before the email arrived. What's different is quieter than that. It's the understanding that the performance of wealth and the architecture of it almost never live in the same person at the same time. Somewhere out there tonight, someone is standing in front of a vending machine, annoyed that it just ate their dollar, with absolutely no idea the annoyance is the beginning of a question worth asking. The knowing doesn't make Wednesday easier, but it does make you wonder quietly what you're actually building now and for whom.